Hey folks, welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. D. Lakin Basses. I want to make sure that I always spend time on every episode to acknowledge Dan Lakin and D. Lakin Basses. Dan Lakin is the co-founder of Lakeland Basses. He's now started a new company, D. Lakin Basses. I'm honored to be a part of the D. Lakin family, and Dan and I co-designed a bass for the Inspired By series. It is a 5-string fretless with an alder body, a flamed maple top, Bartolini pickups and preamp, a 3-way mid selector, a tap coil on the Music Man style pickup. It's 35-inch scale with an ebony fingerboard, hip shot, bridge, hip shot, lollipop tuners. I couldn't be more thrilled to have worked with Dan to create this bass, and working with Dan was so great. And even if he personally disagreed with me, which not gonna lie, and I kind of hope Dan hears this, he knows he did. He disagreed with me on some things, but he still went to bat for me, and I had some ideas about a preamp, and he talked to the folks at Bartolini for me, and Dan and I eventually sorted it out. And honestly, I always kind of went Dan's way on it because Dan is he's the bass designer and builder, and it was fantastic working with Dan and his building team to get this bass in production. And I can't wait to actually play it and have it realized. That is D. Lakin Basses. You can go to dlakinbasses.com. There's links all over the place. At thebasshed.com. But check out what Dan's up to. Drop him emails. Tell him that you are a friend of Ryan Roberts, and he would love to talk to you about basses. All right, welcome to episode 38 of the Bass Shed Podcast. On the episode is Dave Swift. Dave Swift is the house bass player for the UK show, the show out of the UK, the BBC. Later with Jools Holland. Dave is going to talk about how he got involved with the show, his audition back in 1991, and he's held on to the show, for 28 years, close to 30. And he's going to talk about some stories of, some icons he's gotten to play with that I think those are really fascinating. He's also going to talk about how some of his really early musicianship days, before he even played bass, how those would come into play later on the show and create some different opportunities for him on the show. It's really cool. And we could have went on, and I'm sure he's got hours and hours worth of stories to tell with legendary musicians and that he's worked with along the way. Another thing that Dave has done is he had contributed to a book that maybe some of you know about. The book is called Jade Visions, The Life and Music of Scott LaFaro. And he's going to tell the story about how he became kind of a contributor to the book and how he met with Scott LaFaro's sister, and some just really cool stories that would be in a surreal experience for anyone who is an upright player or was influenced by Scott LaFaro, which I think many of us were. If you're a jazz player out there, that specific little clip on LaFaro will be separate up at thebasshed.com. It's just a fun little story. I wanted to make sure that it got heard. But I'm working with the time thing here sometimes. I like to try to keep episodes at a certain amount of time. And again, Dave and I could have went on for hours and hours talking about all the things we agreed on in music, and I loved hearing his perspective on so much and all the stories he has. So without any more introduction, here is Dave Swift. How you doing, man?
Yeah. I'm very good. I'm actually. Well, it's great to finally link up as well, but also it gives me some respite from my 3.5-year-old son.
I bet.
In fact, earlier on, before you called, I was just started to learn the bass parts to our upcoming New Year's Eve TV show. The Hoot Nanny that we do.
Yeah, you were telling me about that. For those listeners that might not be familiar with Jools Holland, set up him as an artist and the show, just so we can talk about that and everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I became aware of Jools through him being a member of the, rock band Squeeze.
Okay.
And in the 70s, Squeeze were huge. They were always on TV, and they had some amazing hits. Like sort of Cool for Cats and Up the Junction. And so I was a fan of theirs anyway. And then Jools, he was the keyboard player in the band. The main singer-songwriters were Chris Difford and Glenn Tilbrook, but Jools was the keyboard player. Because Jools was so flamboyant,
Okay.
he got noticed by a number of people, and he started to be a presenter on TV of music-related programs. So this is like in the early 80s, and he was a very young man himself. And he did one called The Tube, which he co-hosted with Paula Yates, who was married to Bob Geldof at one point. So yeah, her and Jools presented this program called The Tube, and it was a live music show, and it was on quite early in the evening, and it was quite anarchic, really. It was very chaotic and very shambolic.
Shambolic. All right.
Well, it was.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard that word used.
Shambolic. Yeah. Well, it was because it was kind of. It wasn't very polished, but that was the whole point of
Sure.
it. It was like youth TV.
Right.
And it was. I can't remember what time it was on each week, but it was fairly early. And so Jools presented that, and I used to watch it all the time because I just started to be a musician. So I used to watch that show to look at the bass players, to watch what they were doing, and then
Sure.
and so that catapulted Jools, he was quite famous then. All of a sudden, he wasn't just a keyboard player in Squeeze; he was a TV presenter.
Right.
Then, of course, years later, he got another TV show, which is later with Jools Holland, which is a BBC TV show, and that's been going. It started in 1992.
Okay.
And it's been going ever since, and it's a lot more polished version of The Tube that he was on. It's a lot more sophisticated and controlled. But,
yeah.
It's a live music show where there's numerous bands on, and Jools is there as the presenter, and he comes around, introduces everybody. He does interviews with various artists on the show. He also joins in with them as well. He often plays keyboards or piano.
Okay.
Whether they want him to or not, he still does it. But yeah, so but when I first met him, he didn't have that newer TV show, because I joined Jools in 1991, so the TV show didn't start till 92. But yeah, it's made him a household name.
Yeah.
Really.
Now, how did that connection happen in 91, and what was that like for you personally growing up? Him being such a part of your formative years as a musician, what was that like to meet him for the first time?
Well, I had moved to London from my hometown of Wolverhampton in 1988. So I'd already been a pro musician. I left school at 16. I'd been a pro musician for 7 or 8 years, but just a session player, not doing anything high profile, just a working, jobbing session, gigging bass player, but it got to a point, and I used to do things like cruise ships and all that stuff, and I had a great time, but I was always a lot more conscientious than the guys I was working with. I always wanted to, we'd play a set on the cruise ship, and I'd be back in my room listening to Jacko and Stanley Clarke and transcribing stuff. So I was always very conscientious. So in 1988, I thought to myself, do you know what? I need a change of scene. I need to be playing with, players of like a higher caliber, better players than me, hopefully. And I wanted to study as well. And I considered going to Berkeley, but at the time the fees were off the scale. And I thought, well, that's not a choice. So the next best thing was to move to London.
Okay.
And I didn't really, I think I knew 1 or 2 people there. And it was a huge risk because I was walking away from a well-established career in my hometown. Incidentally, my hometown, there's a guy called famous, incredible jazz double bass player called Dave Holland. You've probably heard of Dave.
Yeah, of course.
So Dave's, he's also from Wolverhampton as well, quite bizarrely. But yeah, so I moved to London, and the main thing was I wanted to play jazz. So I didn't want to do stuff I'd done before. So I didn't want to do West End shows. I didn't want to do any kind of theatre or pit work. I did, nothing against that, of course, because I used to do it a lot. But I needed a fresh start. I needed to do something completely different, completely new. And for me, that was to play more improvised music with like-minded musicians. Because, the gigs I were doing were not things like fusion gigs. They were just standard jobbing
Right.
musicians gigs. So, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to be playing this stuff, I need to go somewhere where I can find like-minded players. So I was in London doing jazz gigs, mostly playing upright bass. I was
Mm-hmm.
hardly using electric at all. And it was lovely. I was playing in loads of jazz trios, quartets, listening to loads of jazz recordings as well, But
Yeah.
anyway, one of the sax players I was working with, just a local guy, and this was in southeast London, just where I ended up. And he'd already got the gig with Jools. Now, bearing in mind, this is around 1991. So Jools had left Squeeze and joined Squeeze and left them and rejoined them countless times.
Okay.
I think this was his final time. He'd realized that he wanted to. Now, bearing in mind, I'd lost track. I'd lost track of what was happening with Squeeze and Jools as well, because I hadn't really thought about him for a long time. So when my friend said, "Oh, listen, Jools is looking for a bass player." Now, I don't know if you know this, Ryan, but Jools' first bass player, well, Pino Palladino,
Yeah.
his first gig when he moved to London from Wales was with Jools Holland.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that actually.
Yeah, so Pino is obviously from Italian Welsh background. So when he moved to London, and I don't know when that was, I'm sure you could easily find out. But one of the first people he met was Jools, and that was his first gig, was playing with Jools. And in fact, there's an album out there they did. I think it's called Jools Holland and His Millionaires.
Okay.
And there's a picture on the front of them in some open-top Cadillac, and there's a double bass Pino, which is odd because Pino never played double bass. So
right.
But yeah. So when I heard that Jools was looking for someone, I did a bit of research, and also Jools was on TV a little at the time, doing some appearances in various things, and I remember seeing Pino playing with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously sort of Pino had moved on, and the other bass player that Jools was using was his former bass player in Squeeze, which is a guy called Keith Wilkinson. Now, what had happened at that time, Squeeze decided they wanted to reform yet again. And the drummer, Gilson Lavis, who was always the long-term drummer in Squeeze, they'd been working with Jools because there'd been a lull in Squeeze activity. But when Squeeze reformed, they had the choice: do we stay with Jools Holland on his new solo career, or do we go back with Squeeze? And they went back with Squeeze.
Oof.
Which for the bass player wasn't that fortunate.
Yeah.
But for me, it was incredibly fortuitous.
Yeah.
Because so I'd been told by this sax player that I was doing jazz gigs with. He said, "Well, look, Jools predominantly wants a double bass player this time."
Okay.
He'd only ever had electric bass players before, and now because he wants to do his own stuff and he wants to do more traditional R&B blues, he really wants a double bass player. So he said, but he needs to hear you. You'll have to go along. I think he wants you to do an audition. Now, here's the other interesting thing: nobody else in that band had to do an audition apart from me.
Oh wow!
I was the only one, and I think the reason for this was that the bass for Jools is so important. I guess if you're a piano player and you're doing a lot of stuff in your left hand, you want to make sure you've got the right bass player that's sympathetic and supportive and doesn't get in the way.
Sure. I was going to ask about that because I know a lot of piano players that are not like jazz guys, right? Like jazz guys, they leave a lot of room for the bass.
Sure.
But when it's not a jazz guy, piano player, and they're playing very percussively and there's a lot of activity in their left hand, they've always given me specific direction about how to go with that and how to work around with it. Most of the time, all they want is for me to double their left hand. Did he give you direction with how to relate to what he was doing with his left hand?
He did, but not on the audition. He definitely did later on, and he kept doing that for the first 15 years. He never stopped.
At least he's consistent.
I know. Yeah. He never stopped giving me any direction. But no, but when we first got there, I went to his studio, which interestingly is, I wasn't living where I am now. I was still in southeast London, but I'm literally now 5 minutes from Jools' private studio.
Oh, cool.
Back then, I was probably 25 minutes away from it, but it's still always been local to me. So I went there, and he was there with a guitarist. They had a baby grand there, and there was no preparation. He hadn't told me to listen to anything. He just said, "Let's jam."
Okay.
Now, bearing in mind, Ryan, that when I was a session player, I hadn't done a lot of jamming with people. Most of my work, I'd been given written notation or chord charts. It was
Right.
all very pre-prepared and controlled. I wasn't one of those players that, that most of the guys I knew, well, actually, some of the guys in Jools' band, they weren't readers. They still aren't.
Okay.
They're more ear players. Whereas for me, I was much more of a schooled player, I guess. But
Yeah.
I knew that I could hold my own. I knew that I could jam with these two, and that's fine. So we played. I can't remember exactly what. Probably just a load of 12 bars. And anyway, seemed to be okay. But you have to bear in mind, Ryan, at the time that Jools. This was '91, so his TV show later with Jools Holland hadn't started yet. He'd not even been given that show. So all this was, this is the guy that used to be in Squeeze that I remember seeing presenting the Tube.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, if you were auditioning for the Jools gig now, you'd probably feel the pressure a lot more.
Sure. There was nothing on the line at the time. There was not
exactly. As far as I knew, I hadn't heard of him doing any gigs or, so it was very low key, and I think this probably helped me relax and be very chilled out. So we played for 45 minutes or something, half an hour, and then at the end of it, he said, "That's great." He said, "But we do have some other people to see," and I remember thinking that doesn't sound good.
No, that's not usually a good sign.
It's very nice, but we have a lot of people to see. So,
yeah.
But anyway, I was packing my double bass away. Him and the guitarist went outside. They had a bit of a chat, and they came back a few minutes later. And Jools said, "Oh, to hell with it. The gig's yours. We start touring whenever, or we have some gigs coming up. Here's a carrier bag full of cassette tapes." Of some gigs, of some rehearsals, whatever. Have a listen to those, and I think that he was on TV at the time. He was doing something. It wasn't that major, but again, that's when I was seeing Pino on there, And he said, "Well, check out those shows as well." He said, "Just pick up the vibe of it." So yeah, that was it. That was the end of '91. So, but yeah, I'm the only one that did the audition, and it was, like I said, I think it was. Everybody else has got the gig through recommendation. Someone said, "I know a great trumpet player," and Jools has kind of gone, "Great, bring him along, let him do the gig, and let's see what happens." But with the bass, I don't think he wanted to take that risk. He needed to meet me, see me, hear me, get the vibe, all that kind of thing. So, but yeah, but later on, he was very specific with what I was playing. So first of all, sometimes, as you said earlier, he wanted me to double what he was doing with the left hand. In fact, there's one song we do called Bumble Boogie, which is the Flight of the Bumblebee, I think it is. And and I always used to do it on electric bass. Now, depending on the speed that Jools does it, if he does it fast, even on electric bass, that's a challenge.
Okay.
But the last couple of tours, he's wanting me to play upright the whole time. And playing it on upright is almost virtually impossible.
Yeah. I mean, it's the line from Flight of the Bumblebee.
Say again, sorry.
It's the line from the melody.
It's not the tune, but it's like a boogie woogie bass part.
Oh, okay.
It's like
yeah.
It's kind of, and it's all octave jumps, whatever, and it's just about doable on double bass. And I'm thinking, oh my days. But yeah, I worked on it. I think I got it mostly okay. But the other thing he used to tell me is, don't spend too much. He liked me to play higher up on the fingerboard. You listen to a lot of those old jazz recordings, and I guess it was so the bass player could be heard. They played a lot of high walking stuff.
Sure, you kind of stand out a little bit more up there. It's a little bit more lyrical and in kind of like a vocal range. Yeah,
exactly. And so ironically, people sort of say, "Oh, the money notes are down." And generally, most of the time they are, but with Jools, actually, the money notes are up the dusty end.
Sure.
But it's purely, I think it's a sonic thing. It's to stay away from, that the range that he's doing in his left hand. And also he likes the notes to be played very staccato as well. He doesn't like, if you're doing a jazz gig and you're told to play really long sustained notes, and Jools, he's the opposite. He likes everything clipped.
Okay, so he almost like wants the feel of a piano duplicated with this real kind of percussive shorter note sound, and with the left hand right just below middle C.
Yeah, and he wants it to sound old school as well. And I think what it is, a lot of those old double bass players, they weren't necessarily clipping the notes, but the recordings, because the recordings weren't so sophisticated, it sounds like they were.
Yeah,
A lot.
yeah. I mean, that's always the thing with some of those, like really checking out the old jazz guys. Like, you don't know what those basses sound like, or
Yeah.
because of technology, because of recording technology.
Yeah, they were playing gut strings and the action
Yeah,
was super high, so they were probably trying to get as much sustain as they could. But because of
sure.
the setup and the strings, it was just coming across as being very, very short and staccato. So Jules, that's what he wanted me to do. That
Okay.
sound that he wanted, So, but yeah, so I really got the gig predominantly because I played double bass. I mean, he wasn't interested in me playing bass guitar, funnily enough. He decided it's all, and this was an acoustic double bass. This wasn't like an electric upright, a stick bass. This was,
Right.
and it was a nightmare. I have to be honest, because trying to tour, and the band wasn't that big at the time. It was a 9-piece. It was 5 rhythm section, 4 horns. It wasn't the 18-piece band it is now. But even
Yeah.
back then, trying to amplify an acoustic double bass with that band, it was a nightmare. I hated it. It was, and I'd never had any experience of playing at those kind of volumes, but I had to stick with it because he didn't want me to play bass guitar. It wasn't until when the TV shows started to come in and it was obvious that some of the styles I had to cover were only going to
Right.
work on bass guitar. So, but it took me a while to convince him to let me use electric. That's for sure.
Now, was this part of? So you came in right behind Pino. In the thing, right? Was this part of why Pino left? Is because Jools wanted a double bass?
Oh no, I think what happened is, so the 2 bass players before me were Pino and this guy Keith Wilkinson, who was the bass player with Squeeze at the time. And actually, the first album of Jules's that I played on was called The A to Z of the Piano. Now, when I got there, Pino and Keith had already recorded some tracks on there.
Okay.
Well, on that album, The 80s of the Piano, there's 3 of us on there.
Oh man.
Pino are playing electric and I'm playing acoustic bass. So we shared the duties on the album. But no, I think what it was with Pino, I think he was, because he'd already started to do work with other people. I think he'd already done some stuff with Gary Newman.
Okay.
And that fretless thing just captured everyone's imagination. Everybody.
Man, that kind of really. I mean, he's a fantastic musician, but that was a thing for him then.
Oh yeah, well it was. Well, do you know what? Pino and I used to be neighbours, like in South.
Oh really?
Yeah, when I not where I'm living now, but the previous place I lived at, Pino was in the next street to me. Literally, we were like, we lived a minute away from each other, and we'd often sort of hang out and bump into each other. And it's quite funny because I have a reputation for being quite a big guy. I'm sort of 6'3", and but Pino's bigger than I am. Pino's like 6'5" or something like that.
Oh man.
It's not very often I meet other players that are taller than me, but we got along. We got along so well, and yeah, I think with Pino it was a combination of many things. One, he was a superb musician. He played guitar prior to that, so I think he had a lot of knowledge from that.
Sure.
But also he was like a real hard worker, but a lot of it, and it's the same with me with the Jools gig. A lot of it is just serendipity. It's timing.
Yeah.
It's right place, right time, or it's doing something that just captures. And like I said, that fretless thing, just everyone heard it and said, "Oh my God!" Because obviously Jacko was doing it with Weather Report in more of a kind of jazz fusion thing, but no one was doing it on pop records. So when
no, I mean I don't really know the album history of the fretless bass, or like maybe that might be something interesting to look into. But Jocko's work with Joni, I would want to say that was the most, the way I think of it, like that's the most pop the fretless had been.
Yeah, I guess from a commercial sense, definitely.
Yeah.
But then, and it's amazing really when you think with Pino, when he did, well, like I said, he started to play with people and the news spread like wildfire because also at that time, the slap bass thing had ruled the waves in the 80s.
Right.
I mean, I used to do it, loads of it. I used to do tons of it, and I actually don't do it at all now because it just got to the point where even I was fed up of doing it and fed up of hearing it. Well,
yeah, it's turned into something else at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So almost, I think people were looking for something different, and then Pino came along and did this amazing stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it wasn't a case of it wasn't anything to do with him not playing double bass. I think he just got so busy. He became so in demand
Yeah.
that that's why he moved on. In fact, we had Gary Newman as a guest on Jools' radio show a few years back, and I think it came up in conversation. I think Gary Newman might have stolen Pino from Jools, and
Okay.
they were very good natured about it. I think basically Gary Newman just offered him more money than Jools was.
Sure.
But Jools I think wasn't, and Jools and Pino are still very good friends, and I don't think there's no problem there because again Jools wanted a double bass player.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. It was like an amicable. We're just going in different directions in our
absolutely.
careers thing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So it's 90. It's 91. You get the gig. You're doing some touring. First time you
actually we weren't even touring. Forgive me for saying that. We were just doing a handful of gigs. College gigs, summer balls, polytechnics. Really very, very, very low-key things. But as they say...
Were they concerts or more like events that Jools might be hosting the event as a personality and then you'd slip back in with the band? Or was it like a concert and it was a really musical listening thing?
No, to be honest, they were kind of gigs. We were just like a gigging band. I mean, like I said, we were doing college gigs. We were doing some club gigs. So it wasn't even... Because bearing in mind that Jools, this was later with Jools Holland, it was pre the Hootenanny New Year's Eve show, pre his radio shows. So he was still, it was a very slow process. He was, just trying to get his name out there. We were just doing clubs and colleges and universities, really low key stuff. But for me, a gig was a gig, Now,
sure,
of course, it wasn't what I moved to London to do because I moved to London to be a jazz musician. So I wanted to be playing in jazz clubs, in Ronnie Scott's, playing trios and quartets, whatever. And all of a sudden, I'm in this kind of blues, boogie-woogie R&B band thinking, well, this is kind of fun. But I guess none of us realized what was going to happen next.
Sure.
So
Now, at this time, right before, when you're at that period where you're just playing gigs kind of around with Jools and you're thinking to yourself, like, I really want to be one of the jazz heavies and be on that scene, but you're in this boogie-woogie band, are you thinking, like, okay, this is a gig, like, cool, I'm working, I'm meeting people, making a little money maybe.
Yeah.
And, like, in the back of your mind, are you still trying to navigate how to get into the jazz scene?
I mean, totally. All my motivation was to play jazz. So all I was listening to was jazz. I was actually, funnily enough, Pino and we ended up studying with the same guy. There's a guy over here called Joe Hubbard who... I can't remember if Joe's American or Canadian, I'm not sure, but he went to Berkeley and he was living in London and he was offering lessons of all the stuff he learned there. So I know for a fact that Pino went to him and I definitely did as well. And the main reason we both did it, I think, was because, I mean, Pino, as far as I know, didn't read music. I don't think he does, but obviously he's a stunning player who plays by ear. For me, because I started off on the trombone, I had formal classical trombone lessons at school, so I could already read music, but I didn't study music as an academic subject. So my knowledge of harmony and advanced improvisation wasn't very good at all, So I think Pino probably felt the same, and so we both ended up going to Joe to study harmony, and I have to say my mind was blown because I didn't realize how little I knew.
Interesting.
I thought, how could I have been like a working pro player for like all these years?
That's always the case, though. That feeling never gets old. Like if even now, you take a little bit of time off the bass, then you get back to it. It's just like, why has anybody ever hired me ever?
It's incredible. But I guess, looking back, because I could read music, I could read, I guess, pretty fundamental chord symbols. I had very, very good technique. I was very good at playing a lot of different styles. So all of those things got me through, I guess, that I had no problem at all. I could sight read stuff, so a lot of my work was like that. But obviously I hadn't been in that situation prior to moving to London where I was having to play improvised music with improvising musicians,
Right.
So that's
so when Jools, sorry to interrupt, when Jools gives you this this bag full of tapes, and you're used to reading charts.
Exactly.
Is this like the first time you've really had to deal with work tapes?
Yeah.
And then how did you go about it? Did you just learn the part? and then like, cool, I know the part, so I know this song, or were you actually then making cheat sheets or something to write out, well, this is the form of the tune, these are the chords? Did you turn the work tapes into an academic study a little bit to process it?
Oh God, yeah, and I've been doing that for the last 30 years with Jools. I mean, because I kind of set the standard back on the first day. So, because I was more of a reading musician, it's fair to say, I could, I mean, you could probably put like a Marcus Miller bass line or a Jacka solo in front of me written, and I could probably play it.
Oh, wow.
But then if you just sort of said, can you come up with something like they would play, I probably couldn't, or
Right.
or it would be harder for me to do. So anyway, so what I did is when Jules first gave me those tapes, I transcribed everything on those tapes. And a lot of it
Okay.
was just walking bass lines. But I just thought,
Sure.
I just I want to get inside both what Pino had done and
Yeah.
what Keith Wilkinson, the bass player with Squeeze, had done. I just thought, I've never been one of those players that just kind of goes, oh, that's kind of close enough. You listen to something while you're in the bath or you're driving a car. I really
Right.
wanted to get inside this. So I transcribed everything. I mean, it took me forever, but I just thought at least I've got it there. And so when I started doing the gigs, but it wasn't like, because I'm the only person in the rhythm section that can read written notation.
Okay.
And the horn players always had charts on stage, and they still do to this day. But it wasn't like cool for the rhythm section to do.
Right.
And I would be the only one that would have charts if that was the case. So I quickly realized, I need to do something I've never done before, which is like learn sets off by heart.
Oh, wow.
Because I've always, everything I did, even from the first day I took up the trombone at school, I had something put in front of me. I had a piece of music.
Sure.
Or a book or something like that. So now I've done the transcriptions. The next thing for me was, I need to learn all this stuff. And that was tough for me because that was what I was least experienced at doing. I mean, even when I was doing jazz gigs earlier on, I was still, and I know sounds terrible, but I was still using the real book, which I know, again, with hardcore jazz players, that was a real no-no. It still is.
Sure.
I don't use it anymore, I hasten to add, because I've built the repertoire now. But back then,
right,
I needed the books, I needed the charts, whatever. But with Jools, so that was great training for me with him, and it was a real wake-up call. It was something completely different. I was out of my comfort zone. So yeah, I knew that I had to have this new skill set where I did this. I had to learn everything. Now, what I've done ever since, funnily enough, is, well, because I was always reading. So when I got the Jools gig, I thought, okay, this is great. I need to do more stuff where there's no charts. I need to do more stuff where I'm having to busk. I'm having to learn stuff on the spot, and that was what was great doing the jazz gigs, because people were calling tunes. I didn't know them. And then you listen and you play. So I was trying to bring my ears up to the same level as my reading skills.
Sure.
Which I'd never had to do before, So, I mean, even when I was on the cruise ships, it was funny. I was playing like Lionel Richie songs and whatever, and I was just playing the chart that someone had put in front of me. And then when I actually got round to playing with Lionel Richie himself, I realized, I thought to myself, my God, you need to listen to the songs. Whereas before I didn't even listen to the songs because I had a chart.
Sure.
Someone transcribed the bass part, and I think, well, I can read this. I can read this, sight read it, and but I wasn't
right. I can read this, so I know the tune. Which is, I mean, there's just two different ways. Like you can read the chart, or you can know the tune, and then hopefully you can do both.
Exactly.
And you actually know what the record is, but then you're also like reading this chart with the record in the back of your mind.
Yeah. So this is what I do now, and so I did that from day one. So with any guest now that's ever appeared. Sorry, I know we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but I always, it's very rare that I get given a chart now by a guest. It's very, very rare that a couple of people did. I think Andy Williams, when I played with him, his MD gave us some charts. And it's great for me because I know that I can just whiz them off, no problem. I can sight read that stuff in my sleep. But most of the time we get given a CD or we get given, we just get sent a recording, but I still transcribe everything. Now, if there's time, I'll learn stuff off by heart. If not, I'll use the chart wherever I am.
Sure.
But it's as important now to work from the recording. So. But sorry. Anyway,
Yeah,
we got ahead of our.
yeah. Oh, that's all right. That's all right.
So yeah, I don't know what happened with the TV show. It just came out the blue, you know. So we were doing these gigs with Jools, like clubs, bars, colleges, whatever. And I can't remember how it happened, but it was 1992, and all of a sudden, we were informed that Jools had got this TV show, this BBC TV show. And I think initially it was just called Later or something. I don't think Jools' name was immediately involved with it. It was just called Later or Late Night or something like that. And they wanted him to host it, and they said there's going to be various bands on there, and yeah, and we just kind of, and we were still a bit bewildered. We still couldn't quite comprehend what this all meant, you know. And then all of a sudden, the thing started up, and I started to get phone calls from Jules's secretary management saying, "Oh, you know, we've got we've got Vince Gill on the show, we've got Mary Chapin Carpenter, we've got John Prine. We need you to come and play bass for these guys." And I'm thinking, say what? You know, because first of all, like some of these people I wasn't familiar with, and interestingly, the first few were all kind of country singers.
Okay.
But I'd never been on TV before.
Yeah.
And it was like baptism by fire, you know. So
Sure.
so yeah, they were all filmed at the BBC Television Centre in central London, and yeah, I mean, some of those early ones, it was some of the bands had some of their own musicians. You know, they might have had a guitarist with them or a percussionist, and you know, I'd be called in to sort of, because they couldn't bring their bass player, so it wasn't like a set thing. You know, like the people have often likened what I do with Jools to like Will Lee did with the Letterman show.
That's who I was thinking about when you were explaining this. And when you would have to play with an artist, what would you get? Would you get a chart? I'm sure that there was a rehearsal for the show, and so you'd get a rundown of what the, you know, maybe however many tunes they're doing is. You know, when I'm thinking about Will Lee, he might play one with them, you know, during the musical thing. But this being a more musical show, you're doing almost a full set.
Yeah.
So what would you get, and how far in advance would you get the knowledge?
Well,
so you could check out recordings and things.
Sure. Well, I mean, in the beginning, it was very, very short notice, and we, like I said, we never got given charts because I guess the people we were playing with, which were pop, country, rock, jazz type people, they just didn't have charts. So they would supply the BBC with a recording, and in the early days, it would have been a cassette.
Right.
And we'd have had that sent in the post. And sometimes it was like the day before or probably at best 2 days before, you know. And yeah, and you just have to learn it whichever way you saw fit. And again, if Gilson, our drummer, was doing it, because Gilson doesn't read or write music, Gilson would just listen to it over and over again because that's what he's always done. Same as Jools. But for me, I was intrigued, you know, because I wasn't a very good student at school, apart from when I was playing the trombone. It's the only thing I ever really worked hard at. But I think when I got this job, I thought, you know, I want to be studious. I had that desire to be a very studious player. So I would just transcribe everything, every little nuance of what was on these people's records. And the way I looked at this as well, Ryan, was and you know, more often than not, if anything's specific on a recording, it's usually the bass. He's often more specific than what the guitar is doing or the piano or whatever. So I thought to myself, it's important for me to work out exactly what's on these records, note for note. So my transcriptions, and I've still got them all. I've got thousands of them in my attic. I kept every single one of them. You know, I'd write the artist, the title of the song, the date. I've got more, you know, and because the way I looked at it is this: if I'd have just listened to it in a very casual way, like I said, sitting in the bath, something like that, and I kind of gone, yeah, I kind of get that. I get the chord sequence. I see what is happening here. And then you turn up at the television centre to record the show, and the artist kind of goes, Dave, you know, are you okay doing that little riff there or that little fill? And I kind of go, what fill is that?
Yeah. Oh, can we just listen to it real quick, and then you try to pick it up on the fly in real time?
Exactly. And I didn't want that to happen because I used to get caught out at school like that, and I was always very embarrassed. And I thought, I don't want this to happen to me again. So for me, doing my homework, which I never did at school, was ultra important now. And I had this great sense of pride and professionalism. And yeah, I
Sure.
just wanted to be super accurate. So again, I would transcribe stuff. Now, on some of those shows, if I didn't have time, if I didn't feel confident enough, I would stick my transcription on the floor monitor,
Okay.
and sometimes I would be reading it, but I knew it was important not to look as though I'm reading it.
Sure.
So that was another skill in itself, you know. But as time went on, I got more and more confident, but yeah, in those early days, we didn't have a lot of time, so that's the reason why I often had the chart on the floor for certain things. Now, I guess with the Letterman show with Will, you know, because it's a lot more arranged, it's a lot more
Sure.
you know, was it Paul Schaefer would have done specific array, everything would have been charted out. Jools, it isn't like that because Jools himself isn't that kind of musician. He's very much an
Right.
improvising, busking, seat of his pants kind of player, which is fine, and he does it exceptionally well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic with that band because you've got me and the horn players who were predominantly had formal training and can read music, but the rest of the rhythm section are not like that, you know. So it's kind of a bit of a weird dynamic. But Jules values what I do greatly because I'm kind of the what do you call it, the stepping stone between the rhythm section and the horns. I've got a foot in both camps.
Sure. Sure.
And Jules knows that I'm super accurate. He's not too worried whether the drums are super accurate or the guitar or even himself. But he knows that I will be 100% super accurate, and there's no
Sure.
discrepancy, you know. And that's a key thing for him. You know, he really depends on that. And because the thing is, otherwise, if I approached the music the same way as, say, the rest of the rhythm section, it starts to become a little nebulous.
Uh-huh.
You know, there needs to be something in there that really ties in with what's on the recording. So, you know, when we ended up playing with people like Shaka Khan, and I'm having to play "I'm Every Woman" or "Ain't Nobody," you know,
Right.
you don't want to be sort of busking that stuff. You know,
No.
you need to know the line, you need to know what's on the record, and you need to know all those little nuances and that. So I did that from day one. But yeah, we often didn't get very much notice. The songs in advance, and then when we got to the studio, you would rehearse just before the recording. The first time you meet the artist would be like an hour or two before the actual recording of it.
Yeah.
Very, very short time, and you just kind of run it. And as you're running it, of course, the lighting people and the camera people are doing their rehearsals as well, so it's good for them. But yeah, you'd only have like a couple of run throughs. At best, just an hour or two before the red light goes. So it was,
Yeah.
you know, so it was a real kind of roast. But having said that, it was amazing training because it just made me realize what's expected of me in this industry and in this band. So, but you know, the funny thing with the TV shows is I look back, I still had hair back in those days. I have to say, not very much. I kind of wish I'd shaved my head sooner because it looks a bit trashy, you know. But it's what I'm wearing. No one told me what you should be wearing on TV because I had no experience, and I look so scruffy, man. I look as though
There wasn't a wardrobe.
no.
Somebody.
No. We were always told you can wear what you want. But kind of Jules has always been very dapper, you know. Jules has been on the cover of like Gentleman Quarterly and things like that, and he's always wore Savile Row suits. And I wasn't like that, you know. So I was wearing my t-shirts and jeans, and man, I look as though I'd just been doing the gardening, or I'd just been underneath a car fixing an oil leak or something like that.
Yeah.
I just had no experience of it. But I thought to myself, well, you know, as long as I'm playing the right thing, as long as I'm playing the music and that. But I do look back and cringe of how terrible and how shabby I looked on some of that.
So then, how long? When did you start to clean it up visually? Like when did you?
I was I've always been a very slow learner, Ryan. I'm afraid. It took several years. I'm afraid it took several years, and I probably didn't have a girlfriend at the time, so I didn't have a woman telling me to shape up really. But you know that was 91. So that was later with Jools Holland. But then I think it proved to be so popular because there was nothing else on TV like that. Prior to that, there was a TV show on UK television called The Old Grey Whistle Test. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that was also filmed at the same place. It was filmed at the BBC Television Centre. But in the 70s, I remember that was the seminal music TV program. I mean, I've got two older brothers, and they definitely would have watched that. But I remember kind of seeing Stanley Clarke and George Duke on that.
Oh wow.
But they had all manner of bands. I mean, you've just got to Google the Old Grey Whistle Test to see what was going on. But it was a slightly different format in the fact they had this guy called Whispering Bob Harris, because he had a very quiet voice.
Yeah.
And he would just sit there and he would introduce the bands. He would just sit there behind a desk and he would say all the time. And they wouldn't be an audience there. It would just be, the bands in the studio sort of playing away. But the Jools thing was, there was nothing else that had been in between that. So all of a sudden that Jools, this later with Jools Holland, became massive, and it catapulted Jools to pretty much being a household name. And then for the rest of us, it raised, everything changed for us, because, we all went from being like, no one knew who we were. We were just like jobbing.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, people were saying, "So on TV, so on TV."
And then I was curious about that. Did you, when you guys aren't taping, is because you're on TV, do you get a lot of other work because they want to be associated with the bass player who's on TV, and you played with all these famous artists? Do you pick up tours and stuff when you're not taping the television show? I mean, right now nothing's happening, but
yeah.
When the world was normal.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, because it's kind of it's the gig with Jools has been a mixed blessing, because because when the New Year's Eve TV show started, that was in '93. So that's called, Jools Holland's Hootenanny. So that's just specifically every New Year's Eve, and it's pre-recorded. It always has been. You couldn't do it otherwise. But that became massive as well. So because obviously New Year's Eve is such a big night for everyone, and if you weren't going out and you were going to put the TV on, most people would watch Jools Holland's Hootenanny. So
sure.
So that gave us even.
Would that be compared to Dick Clark's New York Ball Drop in the States? Like, that's kind of the big thing here.
Sure. I guess so, because we used to have something in the UK, and there's this guy called Andy Stewart, who was a Scotsman in the kilt, and he was up in a castle in Scotland, and it was just a lot of people playing bagpipes, and it was very old school. I remember my friends watching it. But the Jools thing was very hip, because it was we were the house band on there, and we'd be backing. In fact, the first Hootenanny we did. And it was, again, it didn't have the audience in the studio. It wasn't as big as it was. It just got bigger each time. But that first Hootenanny, I think we were playing with Sting, maybe Paul Weller or something. But Sting was definitely on the first one, and it was great because he wanted me to play bass, even though he was playing bass. He very kindly let me stay. But yeah, it was so both of those became massive things. But then as time went on, to go back to your question, it became a mixed blessing with Jools, because I did get called to do stuff with other people, but not as much as you would think.
Okay.
People are seeing me playing bass with all of these, I mean, kind of iconic people. The times we've played with Eric Clapton, with Jeff Beck.
You, for the record, you are the first person I've ever received an email from that starts off, "The first time I played with Paul McCartney." Like, I've never received that email before from anyone.
Yeah, he's a real sweetheart. Well, again, like Sting, when the second time I played with him, he played mandolin on one thing and bass guitar on the other. And I just said, "Well, look, when you're playing bass guitar, I was on upright. I said, I'll sit this one out." He said, no, I want you to stay. And one of the reasons why he wanted me to cue one of the songs we were doing, "Got to Get You Into My Life," and he wasn't sure where one of the sections came. He said, "Dave, I need you on stage to give me a cue." So ironically, if you look at that video of Paul McCartney playing "Got to Get Into My Life" and Jools Holland's Hootenanny, you'll see at one point, halfway through or three-quarters of the way, he turns around to look at me on the camera. And I kind of...
Oh, that's great. I got to look that up. Is that on YouTube? I got to pull that up.
Absolutely. And I either nod or wink or something like that. And that was me giving Paul the cue on one of his songs.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
But yeah, I think what happened is that I did get called to do some stuff. I got called to play... Ray Davis from the Kinks called me up to play on on a solo album of his, and I did some gigs and sessions and tours, but not as much as you would think. And I, to be honest with you, I think a lot of that was to do people, because we were so busy with Jools at that point,
Yeah.
because we were doing the TV show and then and touring, and I think people just thought, you know what, we'll never get this guy. I mean,
Sure.
I'm hoping that was the case, and they didn't think, oh my God, this guy's so awful, we don't want to book him.
Yeah, right.
But
Right.
yeah, it's yeah, the phone. It's, and also it's a different thing. Say with Pino, when people were hearing him at the beginning, because he was doing something very specific with the fretless thing, and also he was playing, on pop records, he was playing original bass lines and
Right.
playing on very, very commercial things. Whereas, with the Jools gig, um, in some ways, the Jools gig, it's when we do the TV show, it's almost like the best cover band that you've ever been in, because we're playing the covers, but we're playing them with the original artists.
Sure. Sure.
So yeah, loads of bass players have played Ain't Nobody and I Am Every Woman, or they've played on Broadway, but have played those with Shaka Khan and George Benson.
Right. It's just like, it's almost as if you're a road player, but the road act is coming to you.
Yes.
and you go through a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Within the course of a year.
Yeah, very much so. So I think that's the other thing as well. It's a bit more difficult to stand out than, say, what Pino was doing, which was playing on original stuff and playing very particular style that really caught the imagination. So I'm kind of, a bit more in the background, really. So I think, but also I do believe a lot of it was, man, this guy is constantly busy. He's always touring with Jools doing the TV show. And later on, Jools got his own radio show. So we would do that. And of course, when people learn about this, it's kind of great. But you think the more people that realize what I'm doing, the more they're probably going to think, oh, we're not going to get this guy. He's going to be too busy. He's going to be too expensive. He's going to charge too much.
Right.
And that really wasn't always the case, I promise.
Now, how did you feel when right before, in 91, right before you do that audition, you're really looking to do creative music and get into jazz, and now you find yourself years later playing in the best cover band ever?
Yeah.
What's this doing to you inside? Would you still have all this like kind of creative energy that you don't have an outlet for? Or did you find some project to direct the creative outlet?
Yeah, I think
the creative energy towards.
Sure, that's a very good question. I think what happened is that throughout my time with Jools, I always attempted to do as many other things as I could. So I was still doing jazz gigs, but it got a lot harder because the touring became more intense, and we always do 2 big tours a year. We do a summer one like 3 months, and we do a winter one for 3 months. So so we're all over the country. I mean, we did a couple of world tours in the early days. We don't do those so much anymore because it just got too expensive, but we do a lot of stuff in Europe. But yeah, it became more and more difficult for me to be doing these small little intimate jazz gigs.
Yeah.
And also, as well, I have to admit, I mean, and I love jazz still. I mean, I'm in my music room here looking at my CD collection, and 99% is kind of jazz or jazz funk or jazz fusion, whatever. So it's still a music that I'm very passionate about. But these days, and back then even, I was literally struggling to be able to do kind of what I moved to London to do. That dream of being a hardcore jazz musician and being known for it, being recognized.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I'll still always be called a session musician. And I suppose that's accurate, but I like to sort of describe myself as a session musician with jazz sensibilities.
Sure. Man, I really think like the best ones were, like, I mean, the Jamerson was an upright player first, and like all that stuff, like that's all. What's the bass line? For Once in My Life, like how live he plays that and how in the moment he plays that, it's like he's playing a jazz tune.
Do you know what? That's I got to play that line because I transcribed it.
Yeah. It's a good one.
When I first got that book, Standing in the Shadows of Motown, it's a great book. It's a great resource book, but not everything in there is completely.
I completely agree with you, and I've also. So the other part of what I do at the Bass Shed is teach transcriptions, and I transcribe them all myself. So I'm very passionate about learning from the record.
Sure.
Like like I've taught music theory at music school, and like I'm aware of the academic side of things too, but I think no one gets hired for that shit. You get hired to make things feel good
Yeah.
and find your place within the music, and that's what you learn from records.
Oh, sure.
Um,
But the transcription thing, I think is super important. I mean,
I agree. Yeah.
I've got folders. I've got like a Jacko folder. I've got an Anthony Jackson. I've got a Pino folder. You know,
no, me too. Me too. Like I'm like on my computer folders with everything in Sibelius, and I don't, because I want them to look clean. And create PDFs. I don't handwrite anymore, but I used to handwrite.
Oh yeah, I still do. Like I said, I'm staring at my table here, and all I can see is just like scraps of paper and like eraser sort of shavings and pencil shavings. I still do that, but yeah, as you said, with Jameson, with that, I got to play it with a female singer over here called Corinne Bailey Ray. She wanted to do it on Jools.
Oh yeah, Put Your Records On.
Yeah,
was the big
exactly
hit.
that, you know.
Yeah.
And well, that's a story because we were due to do that one with her, and I learned all the part, did all the work, and then she decided at the last minute she didn't want to do it. This does happen occasionally. The artist will,
sure.
Well, you know, yeah, they'll just. We happened with Gladys Knight as well. We were supposed to do 3 songs with her, with the rhythm section, and then she just decided in the end she wanted to do it with her MD. She just wanted to keep it really simple and cut down. But you know, I'd done these transcriptions, man, these really elaborate transcriptions of, you know, of her hits. But then again, you see, they still paid me.
Sure.
Doing the work, and but the thing is that with transcriptions, I love doing them because I always say to people, the transcriptions, the hard work is its own reward. Even if you don't get a chance to use them, the fact that you're studying the music, you're you know, you're digging deep into it, you know, you're scrutinizing it.
Man, I obviously 100% agree with you, and I think that then maybe not everybody has the same. And I have other professionals and friends that have been on the podcast. They'll be like, "Man, I hate transcribing," and I understand it. It's laborious. Like it takes a lot of mental focus just to show up to the desk, to start doing it, and then you start transcribing it. But once you really get in, you realize all the subtlety of what really makes these things great. I think there's no better way. There's no better way.
I mean, I have to admit, I was a lot more enthusiastic, you know, in my younger years. I mean, I remember sort of transcribing Jacko's Donna Lee from his solo album.
Sure.
And that took some time. My goodness.
Yeah.
And that was before, and I think I was using the cassette player, man. I think I was even.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and it was pretty torturous, but I was really pleased with myself. But as time goes on, because as you rightly say, it's very time consuming, and it really does take every bit of your mental energy, and your ears are just having to work so hard. And I think as I've gotten older, I'm probably not as enthusiastic.
Fair, but it's funny because the more you do it, the quicker it gets, because your ears just become, you know, and like at this point I can almost visualize a rhythmic thing.
Sure.
You know, like something that's more complex rhythmically. Like I could just visualize it now. I'm like, okay, cool. I don't have to count it out the same way.
Yeah.
I don't have to look for the notes the same way. Like it really does. It takes you to a different place as a musician.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was important, and it was a sign of respect to the player as well. So when I pretty much worked through most of Standing in the Shadows, because I thought to myself, you know, these can be better, these can be more accurate, and so when we did, you know, when we did For Once in My Life, I was so thrilled that I played my own transcription because I knew how accurate it was. But I wanted to pay homage to James because I've got so much admiration and respect and interest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We had Martha Reeves and the Vandellas on the show, the TV show, and we had to play, I think it was Dancing in the Street, Nowhere to Run, and Jimmy Mack, I think.
Okay.
Now on Jimmy Mack, you know, because Jameson played upright on a lot of those early songs, you know. I think My Guy is on upright as well. So anyway, I was playing upright on that, and I transcribed meticulously whatever he did, or any little skips or whatever. And he was really sweet because when we did the rehearsal, I can't remember if it was after the rehearsal or the broadcast, but Martha came over to me and she said something to the effect of, "Man, you must really love James Jameson." And I said, "Oh, well," I said, because I was listening to you and you played everything just right, just as he would with all the inflections. You must be
Yeah.
a big fan, and you must be. And I said, absolutely. I said, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't. Where he's the start of it all, really. But that.
He is. He is.
So,
Yes.
and as you rightly say, he was a jazz double bass player, and I think that's the reason why he was such a melodic bass guitarist. Carol Kay, I think, was a jazz guitarist, wasn't she? And that's why
Yeah.
there's so
Yeah. She
much,
was.
such rhythmic kind of inventive playing. So, but interestingly, for me, because I started on the trombone, but weirdly, I wasn't an improvising trombone player. I was playing in every band on the trombone before I even picked up a bass. So I was playing in big bands like swing bands. I was playing in a funk band, a brass band, a concert band, an orchestra, like literally anything you can imagine where a trombone would be. But it was always written down.
Sure.
I wasn't improvising and I wasn't doing solos. So it wasn't until I switched to bass that I realized, oh my goodness, at some point I'm going to have to read chords, I'm going to have to busk, I'm going to have to improvise, I'm going to have to do a solo.
It's such a different skill set. Like those rhythm section instruments, the one, yeah, obviously the bass, but like I can't imagine trombone players getting work tapes. Like it's such a different world, or having to deal with a number system, or when people just like you get a chart and it's just the Nashville number thing.
They've been together for so long, but they're particularly good. If we're playing something that a lot of the stuff we get to play on Jools' TV show doesn't have horn parts on there. Especially on the New Year's Eve show, we're playing stuff that's never had any horns at all, but the BBC want them to be involved. So there's about 4 or 5 of them in the section, different sections, and they're the arrangers, and they just come up with stuff. And sometimes they'll do it on the spot. We'll be running something, and they'll just start to play, and at the end of it, they've got an arrangement. But I guess if you've always done it like that, then you.
Yeah, I have some friends that my friends are Justin Timberlake's horn section, and I think Justin Timberlake bills them as the Tennessee Kids, but in town they're just known as the Regiment Horns, and like they do a ton of sessions, and now even more so since Timberlake. But that was their gig. Is like you just hire them and they show up and create arrangements on the spot, and they knew how to work with each other, and it was dialed in.
Sort of second nature. But it was interesting for me. What happened is that I gave up the trombone. So I started on 14, took up bass. So having lessons on the trombone, but I was self-taught as a bassist. So I took up double bass and bass guitar at the same time while I was still at school, but I taught myself. Just got a few books.
Oof. That's a lot to take on because you're learning the bass, but like two very different physical ways
it was actually my trombone teacher
of dealing with the instrument
that did it. And I recently discovered he's still with us. I'd lost contact with him 36 years ago, and I recently discovered he's still around. And we linked up, and I spoke to him on the phone because, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Because, like I said, I with trombone, that's what I learned to read, and that's what I learned about music theory. But shortly after that, I took up bass guitar because some friends wanted to form an offshoot of the school band, and we needed a bass player. So I initially got a bass guitar, but then when my trombone teacher heard I could play that, he said, you should definitely take up acoustic double bass, because if you do decide to do this for a job, which I never did, not for 1 second did I think about I could do this professionally. This was just for fun. He said you would get more work if you play upright and electric. So when I left school, my trombone teacher was a fixer in the area. He would book me for gigs and shows and a lot of pit work. But he'd always book me as the bass player. He wouldn't book me on trombone because he wanted the trombone gigs himself. So I carried on playing trombone probably up until I was about 19, I think. But then I felt as though I had to make a decision. I was spreading myself too thin. I was playing trombone, bass guitar, double bass. And I just thought, and I felt as though it was confusing the issue, and I was exhausted trying to be at the top of my game with all 3 instruments. So I actually gave up the trombone completely for decades, for several decades. And whenever it was, I took it up again because I always missed it. I always thought one day I'll come back to it, And I did. I took my, I remembered how to play it, just had to get my chops back. But the cool thing about this is that what I then learned from being a bass player, so in other words, reading chords and improvising and whatever, and playing jazz as a bass player, I was able then to switch back all of that knowledge onto the trombone. So there's this kind of interpollination thing kind of going on. That's what one. So my trombone playing helped my bass playing with the reading side of the discipline, but then the bass playing helped the trombone with the improvisation and playing more free, and it is quite cool actually, because occasionally on Jools's radio shows in particular, most of the guests are singers, but every now and again we'll get bass players that come on, and we had Jack Bruce from Cream, and we had Mike Rutherford from Mike and the Mechanics. We had Tony Visconti, Bowie's producer, but predominantly a bass player. And even Susie Quattro came on. And of course, they all wanted to play bass on the show. And, for me, I just said to Jools, listen, I'll just jump on on trombone. I'll just join the horn section, So, I've actually played trombone with all of those guys, which is kind of quite fun. So I'm glad that I came back to it and, enjoying it. But I know we got away from your question about the jazz thing. So, I tried to do as many jazz gigs as I could because I wanted to keep my jazz chops up. I wanted to still be inventive. But the Jools gig did seduce me a lot because, I'd never played in a famous band, and all of a sudden I was getting endorsement deals. I was getting asked to be.
Yeah, man, that's what I was gonna say. It's kind of once you start being this idea of recognition or being seen or getting praised within a certain line of work, it's hard not to just follow the gravy train and follow the work, and like now you're making a living, and you're getting some free stuff. So it's hard not to continue on that path.
Double bass. I was buying double bass strings, which we notoriously expensive, and anything I was paying for. But you get the Jools gig, and all of a sudden everything's for free, and then you've got roadies that are moving all your gear. You have not having to touch anything. And also interestingly, Jools, when we do gigs, when we tour, Jools doesn't do sound checks. He doesn't like doing them. He doesn't like getting there in the afternoon and hanging around. So we have the same crew pretty much that we've had for forever. Some have come and gone and been replaced, whatever, but it's pretty much the same touring crew. So they do a line check of everything during the day. So we literally turn up to the gig.
Oh, wow.
I mean, Jools likes us to get there, as long as we're there 20 minutes, quarter of an hour before the gig, he's kind of cool. But, you can get there as early as you want. But, we literally just go out on stage. And the first we touch our instruments is the first song. So, but again, our crew set things up. And, sometimes if the hotel is close to the venue we're playing at, I'll go in early just to have a fiddle around if I have new gear or whatever, But most of the time, that's how it works. So and then I started to think about those jazz gigs, when you got to drive somewhere and you got to set your own.
You got to pull up, you got to drop off your stuff, then you got to circle the block looking to where you park your car. Then you got to walk 2 blocks back to the gig and then start setting up.
There was a great thing on Facebook, and it had a photograph of a jazz club when COVID first hit, and the jazz club was empty. There's another photograph pre-COVID, and it was still empty. And all of these things started to get to me, and the Jools thing. I mean, it was kind of the closest I'd ever had to a rock and roll lifestyle. It was kind of, and I'm not talking about massive excesses, but I'm talking about fun and having a laugh and flying to places.
Yeah, you don't have to do all the grunt work when you're just doing the day in and day out gigging circuits.
And it was great, and I absolutely loved it, and I did get quite seduced by it. But then, I always felt guilty. I was thinking, oh man, but I'm not studying, I'm not playing jazz as much as I wanted to. I'm not studying it, I'm not listening to it as much because there just wasn't time, But I did what I could, in between all the things with Jools. I mean, I still do them now. Actually, my main thing outside of the Jools gig now are doing jazz gigs. And my wife, Lucy Marilyn, we've only been together 5 years. We got married last year. We've got a 3.5-year-old son. But Lucy is a professional jazz singer. She wasn't when we met. She could sing, But when we met, and she told me about her passion for jazz. I said, "Who are your favorite performers?" I thought she was gonna, say Miley Cyrus and stuff like this. But all of a sudden, she's saying, "Oh, Carmen McRae, Julie London,
Oh
Dinah
wow.
Washington." I'm
Yeah.
thinking, and she's Lucy's like 33 years my junior. And I'm thinking, wow, she loved jazz. So over time, the last few years, she's become a professional jazz singer herself. So we do gigs together. At
Oh
jazz
cool.
venues, and it's like doing standards. And she has her own show called the Legendary Ladies of Jazz. So she'll do three Carmen McRae things, three Peggy Lee songs, a couple of Dinah Washington, some Julie London stuff. And if I can do it, I'm always a bass player. So I'm still, yeah, my main gigs outside of the Jools thing are jazz. So I'm still doing them. I'm
Yeah.
still playing upright, but I guess people still won't call me an out and out sort of jazz player because of my association with Jools. But that's really where my heart lies. Is playing acoustic double bass, playing jazz, playing standards.
What are some of your favorite records jazz wise? Like going all the way back on either instrument, on the double bass or on electric. Like what records do you always kind of check in with?
One of the first recordings I heard that really caught my attention was well, actually, I've got two older brothers. They're 8 and 11 years older than me, and my middle brother, when I took up double bass, he bought me a Charles Mingus album, and it's called
Okay.
Nostalgia in Times Square. And I'd really not heard any jazz before, and I'd certainly never really listened to double bass players because I'd only been playing trombone for a year. I'd only been playing bass for months, and he bought me this Mingus album. And man, and I love Charles Mingus. I mean, I love him as a bass player and as a composer as well. Man, he's so edgy, so
Yeah.
gritty, and so atmospheric.
And that's like jumping into the deep end, man. Like the first jazz record being
Yeah,
Mingus, like with no context of what Mingus was
I
doing or
know.
like where all that was
Oh my
coming
God, yeah.
from.
I
That's
didn't know who
crazy.
he was. I didn't know his background, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's called Nostalgia in Times Square, and I love going back to that because it was from my brother, and it was him saying, "Well, I guess if you're going to be a double bass player, you should." And I don't know if he knew anything about the album. Maybe he just went into a record shop and just saw it and it caught his attention. I don't know, but
Sure.
but I love going back to that because it's probably the first time I really listened to it. But listened to jazz. Carol Kay was important too, but mainly because of her books. Because there were no, I had a trombone teacher, but there were no bass teachers. Nobody was teaching, especially electric bass. So for me, I just bought every book I could find. And Carol Kay were the main books. And there was another
Okay.
one and it's interesting. Both my early books were by female bass players. There was a lady called Valda Hammock, who I think was in California. She might still be with us, and she did two books
Hmm.
that I saw online, not online. I saw in a magazine I sent away for. So, yeah, my first two bass tutors were female, Valda and Carol, and those books were really important because that was it. I didn't have anyone to go to. I like the recordings, of course, but
What did you gain from Carol's playing? I mean, her thing was just like setting up these parts that worked great for the
yeah.
song. And then she's playing with a pick.
With Carol's thing, it was the first time someone was telling you how to fret the notes, and of course it was all pick
Mm.
playing, whatever. But I quickly realized that if I was going to be a working musician, um, that Carol's school of thought and style of playing was going to be more helpful than the Jacko thing. So I was still transcribing,
Yeah.
Jacko's lines and Stanley's things, but it was almost kind of doing it for my own enjoyment and entertainment. I knew that
Sure.
what I was reading in Carol's books and listening to her playing was going to be more beneficial to me because I thought if I played more like Carol when I did gigs and that I wouldn't be fired.
Right. No. Yeah. You're
Compared
absolutely
with
right. That's I mean
trying to
that's
do Jacko's fills and runs and Stanley's, whatever. So but I had like a foot in both camps there. I loved all that early jazz fusion and stuff like that. But then I still love songs. I just, like listen to the Carpenters, I think, which was Joe Osborne, I think, on there. So I realized pretty early on what was going to be And that's the reason why I'm now. I with a Jools gig, there isn't a bass seller. There used to be years ago. I had a big bass feature, which was cool. Um, I used to go out front with a double bass, and Jules said you do whatever you want. And we did a tour with Sting. We supported Sting many years ago, and this is quite funny because we went on and I did this big bass feature, and we do Ragnar Do. We came off stage, and Sting's in the wings, and as I'm coming off stage, he gives me a big hug, and he said, "Man," he said, "I love your playing." He said, "It's so beautiful." He said, "It reminds me of Charles Mingus."
Oh wow, man, that's a sweet thing to hear, specifically for you with your
Yeah,
relationship to
and
Charles
I thought,
Mingus. Yeah, and like so you have this bass icon telling you sound like
yeah,
your formative
yeah.
bass. Man, that's huge.
It
That's
was
huge.
really sweet. It was very, very cool, But I think sort of maybe Jules thought the bass solo was getting too popular, so he got pulled, and there isn't really a bass feature anymore.
Couple more questions and we can wrap up. One, what are you still learning on Jules' gig? You've been in it for what, 28 years
Yeah.
now, roughly?
Uh,
What are you still learning from playing with the same guys in a book that you're very comfortable with and guys you're comfortable with? It's an act you're very comfortable with. What are you still gaining from
Okay.
this?
Well, I'm certainly sort of learning the benefit of isolation and tranquility in my hotel. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because when you're younger, you always want to hang out and you always want to sort of spend time with
Sure.
everyone. But the thing is, I realized, as much as I enjoyed that rock and roll lifestyle and having lots of fun and parties and staying up late, I realized that one, as you get older, you got to start looking after yourself. And
Yeah.
I never used to
Right.
make breakfast, because I was always probably still in the bar when breakfast was
Yeah.
being served. But I mean, never anything terrible, but just, we all were having a good time for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's it. That's what happens. The gig's over and the band goes out and hangs,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you know,
exactly. But I think over time, with all due respect to the guys, because we traveled together and we were in the band room, we're on stage together, and afterwards, so I was starting to realize, I'm still very studious. I always want to study. So on tour, I take my trombone with me. And I
mm,
also started to play guitar last year because it's an instrument I always wanted to play. Both my brothers played it for fun at home. Um, Now,
okay,
the thing with
okay.
guitar is I just couldn't get on with the tuning of it. So I tune my guitar in all fourths.
Oh
Okay.
wow.
So
So C and F.
exactly that. Some guys
Yeah.
keep the two top ones the same and they tune everything down, but I go up to C and F. And I play 6 and 7 string basses, so this is cool for me. But I've got a couple of
Sure.
guitars, and you know what? This by taking that on tour and by still having a drink with the guys, but really sort of getting back to the hotel room, and if I'm not too tired, spending time practicing the guitar as even at this late stage in my career is still helps me massively with understanding even more about harmony and melody and
Sure.
soloing and stuff like that. But I can only do it with it tuning forwards, and it's great. There's some books been written on the subject, and it's great because when you learn chord shapes, there's more repetition of them because it's the same thing all the way across.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't have that weird G to B bump, which always drives me crazy.
Right. Yeah, that always messes it
Yeah,
up. Yeah.
so I'm definitely I'm appreciating because I still want to study. I still want to learn. I want to be a better player than I was last week. I want to be more knowledgeable. Um,
Sure.
so it's really more what I've learned about myself. I think I want to make better use of my time. And interestingly, I recently took up the tuba because I messed around on it as a kid before the trombone, and I'm just thinking, if I'm playing a brass instrument, I should maybe pick something that's more bass orientated. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got one Yamaha kindly loaned me one, and I've been playing it here at home, and I absolutely love it, man. I mean, Jesus, this thing is bigger than me, and it takes a lot of work. It's a lot harder to play breath wise than the trombone. But I'm just thinking it'll be
Sure.
fun with Jules. That I can use it in the horn section, or some if we do any recordings. You don't
Yeah.
need to hire an extra tuba player in because I'll step in and do it. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. But I think with the Jules gig, it's still, I'm still learning about restraint and good taste because Jules doesn't like any showboating. He doesn't like any unnecessary flamboyance.
Sure.
So the Jools thing.
Now, because you had described him as being flamboyant at the beginning of this, is it because he likes the space for
I
himself?
think it is that, and I think maybe he thinks if
Yeah.
I play too flashy, that I'll get noticed more, and I'll leave that.
Right.
I remember we did a gig years ago, and I knew that Jules likes me to keep it very, very simple. He likes me to keep it very, very basic. It's different when we're playing with other artists. He would never say to me, "Oh, don't play what's on the record." He knows that the artist wants whatever it is. It doesn't matter how complex it is. But on his own stuff,
Sure.
or playing more traditional stuff. And we did a gig years ago, and I don't know. I cheekily put a little fill in somewhere because I had some friends in the audience. I thought, to hell with it. And Jules came
Yeah.
up to me and he noticed it, man. He didn't miss anything, and he came up and he sort of said, "Yeah," he said, I love your playing." He said, "But man," he said, "I did notice at one point it went a little bit weather report there." And I'm laughing inside because I thought to myself, "Wow, I wish." Uh,
Right. Like, really? You think I sound like
yeah, yeah.
Jocko? Awesome. Like, that's how bass players hear that. It's like, oh, man, really?
To me, it was
Thanks.
like a really weird backhanded compliment because he was telling me that
Sure.
he didn't want me to be doing that. At the same time, he sort of said, "Oh, it sounds a bit weather." I think, "Oh, that's very kind of you," I
Yeah,
think.
exactly.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's still very much about restraint and control, which and not in a bad way. It's a discipline thing. The dual gig for me
It
is the
is. It is,
constant
yeah.
reminder of doing what needs to be done, nothing more, nothing less. It's a discipline thing, and that's always been there from day one. So that's still a key thing.
I talk about that a lot when I talk through transcriptions. Of like, you could take a line, Bob Babbitt's "Just My
Sure.
Imagination," super easy bass line, right? It's like four notes
Yeah.
the whole time. But the fact that he didn't, that's the
Yeah.
lesson.
Oh yeah.
The lesson from that line is the fact that he didn't add anything. The lesson is that he kept it those four notes the whole part.
Yeah.
That's some serious mature
Well, do you know what?
stuff.
I've got some really favorite players, and do you know what? They're predominantly pick players. I really love bass players who play with a pick, but not rock players necessarily. So
Sure.
always loved Carol. I love Steve Swallow,
Mm-hmm.
both on double bass
Yeah.
and electric. I think Bobby Vega is wonderful. I love younger guy called Cody Wright. I don't know if you're familiar with Cody.
Oh, I'm not.
Yeah, check Cody Wright out. He plays guitar as well, but he's a monster. He's one of my favorite players. But if I had to pick my favorite living bassist, I'd probably have to say Anthony Jackson. Anthony for me is something very, very, very special, very unique. I've been following Anthony's
Yeah.
career. I've got so many of his recordings. I've met him a few times. In fact, I was with him. Me and Lucy were with him the night he had the stroke. Few years
Oh my
back. We were with
gosh.
him just before he had it. He was with Hiromi, and they were playing at the Jazz Cafe in London. And because I'd met him
Yeah.
a few times and I'd written a couple of articles on him, really short sort of things, just like a little homage in a few magazines. And so he knows who I am. I've even got an Anthony Jackson Federa signature model that he set
Okay.
up and he signed for me. I still got that. So yeah, he's a real hero of mine. But yeah, that night we were chatting with him after the gig. He called us up on stage, and Lucy and I were chatting away. And when we left, I think it was shortly after that when he left the club with the drummer Simon Phillips, he fell outside, and I think that's where he had the stroke. Because the next day, his tour manager called me up, and he said, "When Anthony was speaking to you last night, how was he? Did he sound
Right.
okay?" I said, "He sounded perfectly fine. He's obviously Anthony speaks very, very dignified. He doesn't gabble away like I do, And I said, no, he was just as he was. So it must have happened literally as he was leaving the club. But it was the same night we were with him. But yeah, I love Anthony's playing, his sound, that whole pick thing. I've done a lot of transcriptions of Anthony's, and it's a shame actually because with Ain't Nobody and I'm Every Woman, he's not on those Shaka
Right.
Khan ones. He's on a lot of the other stuff, but he's not on there. But yeah, I mean, I love those guys, and I still listen to them, and I still sort of study them. And even if I don't get to play how they play and what they play, it's still important for me to have that I want to be excited like I was when I was younger. I still want to listen.
I love that. I love that. Me too. Like I'm still chasing that initial
Yeah,
excitement, even though like I've heard so much music and like I understand music and the bass and what I'm listening to on these records in a whole
yeah,
new way. I'm still chasing something that excites me the way that the first Stanley Clark,
sure.
the first record I ever bought was Stanley's first CD, just
Yes.
self-titled. And I remember just listening to that
Mm.
over and over and over. I had no idea what was going on, but I
Oh yeah.
loved it. And I'm just always looking for excitement like that all the time in all
Yeah,
genres of
and
music.
sometimes it's hard to do. I mean, I'm 56 now, and I've been a pro player for 40 years with Jools for 30, and there's lots of things that have happened over the years. I've had a lot of health issues, which have sort of knocked me for six, and I've lost both my parents. There's a lot, but nothing more than
Oof.
most other people have experienced. But you get a lot of setbacks, and sometimes it is hard to have the same
Sure.
enthusiasm. But I don't know, for me, I just love music and the whole, particularly bass thing, so much. And I still go to bass conventions. I've been doing some online bass convention things, chatting with people, interacting. I love going to like music shows. I collect basses. I've got 100 bass guitars somewhere.
Wow.
I'm still
Nice.
this huge bass geek, really. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just can't shake it off, and so, but yeah, I think with the Jules thing, it's tricky because it would be so easy to try and to sneak, and it'd be so easy to get annoyed that I'm not able to be more flamboyant. People have said to
Sure.
me over the years, they said, "Man, if we had the Jules, we see you there, and you stand there very solemnly, and you do what you do." But they said, "Man, if we had that gig, we'd be putting our foot on the monitor, we'd be doing this and doing that and whatever." And I said, "And yeah, and you'd be fired."
Yeah, that's why they don't have the
I
gig.
said, why do you think I've kept it for 30 years? It's because I don't do that,
Exactly.
So, but it's
Right.
still important to keep that enthusiasm up outside of it, But and the Jules thing, it's so unique. It's such a unique gig. There's no other gig where you go out as a touring band, but then you're part of a TV house and radio band, and you're playing with
Sure.
these icons, these living legends, and you just have to. And also, I've learned a lot about social interaction from that, because you're
Mm.
dealing with people, even though they're famous, they some of them are not as confident as you think. So sometimes, you've got to be a social worker, you've got to be a babysitter, you've got to be a
Sure.
confidant. You've got to be a lot of things to these people. When we played with Smokey Robinson on Jules' show, and it was a rhythm section, our own guitarist couldn't make it, so Jules got Eric Clapton to take his place. But we were rehearsing during the day, and Smokey wasn't there, and we were told he's not going to make it until the recording of the show. Um, and
Yeah.
and Eric looks to me and he said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "We're going to be playing with Smokey with no rehearsal." And I said to him, I said, "Eric, welcome to my world, mate. Welcome."
This is hilarious that Eric Clapton is worried about playing.
Yeah,
That's funny, but that's actually this is perfect because it does lead me to the next thing I wanted to ask, which is, what are some of your favorite takeaway moments like that with these stars and these musical icons that you got to interact with on a personal level, and you've got to give Paul McCartney the cue, and you're talking Eric Clapton down off the ledge like, "Hey Eric, it's gonna be all
yeah.
right, buddy. It's gonna be okay."
Well, yeah. I mean, the McCartney thing is a great example, because I'd already had the good fortune to play with George Harrison.
Oh
We'd
wow.
spent George's 50th birthday with him. The band had been invited to a party, and Jules was doing some filming with him for the Beatles anthology. So I'd already met and played with him, and I'd met and played with Ringo. So Paul was the last one out of them, and yeah, just and playing got to get you into my life, which for me, the main version I knew was the Earth, Wind and Fire one. But yeah,
Sure.
but he was so nice of him to sort of, because he was playing mandolin on one song and then bass guitar on the other, and I just assumed that he would have wanted me to sit it out. So the fact he let me stay, and we had that fun with the cue thing, so that was a lot of fun. I mean, another favorite of mine was Al Jarreau. I absolutely adored
Mm.
Al Jarreau. In the 80s, when I was working on the cruise ships, I just used to listen to him every day, all day. I loved his albums, and I had all of them. So
Okay.
when he came, he did the radio show, but he did the TV show, and he wanted to do a track off latest album, and the track was called Last Night. And that's on YouTube as well. And it was just Al Jarreau, me, Jools, and a percussion player. And my only regret with it is I wish I'd have played acoustic bass, because on the recording it was a synth bass. That's the other thing with Jools' show. When we do these pared down versions, sometimes we just do these more intimate acoustic versions of it. And I was still trying to make the bass sound like a synth, So I had a fretless P bass going through an octave pedal. And afterwards I thought, man, I should have just used my double bass and done it much more as a low key acoustic thing. Anyway, by the by, just playing with this guy was glorious. Yeah. And at the end of it, if you watch the video, Jools shakes hands with the percussion player. Al Jarreau shakes hands with Jools, and I'm standing at the back, kind of thinking, okay, like Billy No Mates here, yeah, thanks. Don't worry about me. And at the last minute, you could see Al turn round, and he just is it to say, "Oh my God, we can't forget Dave," And he leans over and we do this big handshake, and I just, oh man, nice. that was so wonderful. So I love that. The Smokey thing was funny, because I said with Eric, just was incredulous. I had to keep saying, Eric, this is what happens on this show, man. I said, we're just going to have to get on with it, because he was used to rehearsing for days and weeks and months.
Oh, sure. Before a tour, and then it's the paint by numbers, but you've rehearsed all that for those big tours.
And the song that we did, it was that song that Norah Jones had a hit with called "Don't Know Why." So there's a lot of chords in it, And but yeah, sure enough, we had to run through it ourselves like an hour before, and then no sign of Smokey. Smokey turns up. We don't even say hello to him. He just walks out into the middle of the room and starts to sing it, and we have to play it. No rehearsal at all with him. And at the end, he comes over and he gives me and Eric a big hug. And it's the first time I've ever met Smokey. I've never met him in my life before, But he just gives me a big hug and he said, "That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys." And then he went off, and I'm thinking, "No, that's cool. That's So I met him after we'd played with him. So to get to play with those two, those icons on the same.
That's something special.
Oh yeah, and you can, and also I normally play standing up. But Eric said to me, he said, because we were right next to each other, and he said, "Do you mind if we sit down? Is that okay?" I said, "No, I'm happy to do it." And if you watch the clip, although I think the BBC have taken it down. I think it might be a copyright thing. But man, I'm sitting next to Eric, and he's doing a solo, and the grin on my face is like the because I remember thinking, does it get any better than this?
No. I mean, that's kind of it. Like you're sitting, you're playing bass with the dude. You're with Paul McCartney. You're playing bass for the guy that played bass to change the world. Like, man, exactly. It's so surreal.
And yeah, absolutely. And the most recent one, I guess, was with Paul Simon, because. That was a couple of years ago. It's very recent, and he just got a new album out, and there's a track on there called Wristband. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. Again, the clip is out there on YouTube, but it's fundamentally it's voice and bass duet. It's like that's it. There's virtually nothing else in it apart from some hand claps. Now, normally when I do Jools' show, the bass part that I'm playing isn't always that flamboyant. It can often be very, just normal standard stuff, but unless you're playing with Shaka, of course. But then with this, I heard it, man. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a bass feature. This is like a bass solo with some vocals on it, and it was on double.
Did you have to bring out the fretless for that? Because I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, but I can't pronounce the gentleman's name.
Yes, it's the.
They played like that Washburn 5-string fretless.
Do you know what? I think he is on the album, but I think he's playing a stick bass. Because it sounded, or he's playing an acoustic, but it sounded to me on the recording that I got given, it sounded like a double bass to me. It was either a double bass or an EUB. And I think he does play. And I know you mean, but yeah. So it was going to be a double bass thing, and it was. I heard it, and I'm thinking, oh my days, I've never had anything like this before on Jools' TV show in all these years. So I got there, and normally they stick me at the back, and all of a sudden, because of my height, the producer always has a go at me for ruining their backdrop.
Yeah,
And that's why they
yeah,
try and
right.
stick me at the back as low down as possible. But they put me at the front, so I'm standing next to Paul Simon.
Oh my
And she said, "Well,
gosh.
we've got." Yeah,
Wow, what
well,
was that
the
like?
funny, I felt a bit awkward because, I'm six
Sure.
three, and Paul, the lovely, lovely human being that he is, I'm not sure if Paul's 5 foot, or he might just be 5 feet or something like that.
Oh wow, okay. I was thinking he was always around like 5'2",
Yeah.
5'3". I
Oh
didn't
no,
know
I
he
mean, yeah,
was
it could well be.
okay.
Forgive me, and I don't,
I have no
yeah,
idea actually. I just remember like that old video of "You
yeah,
Can Call
yeah,
Me
yeah.
Out" with him and Chevy Chase, and like Chevy looks like a
Someone
giant.
said to me, they said, "Why do they keep putting Paul Simon next to very, very tall guys?" But
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so we're standing next to each other. Now, what the great thing about this was that because you have to run through it 3 or 4 times, and so you're sitting around while the film crew are getting the camera and the lighting ready, and it was nice because you get to know the artist. Now, normally, if I'm at the back, you don't really get to speak to them much, but because we're standing next to each other,
Right.
we're chatting for ages, and he
Oh,
was
that's
such a
great.
lovely guy. He because his father was a double bass player, so he's asking me about
Mm.
my double bass, where it was made, how old it was. He was admiring.
Yeah.
He was talking about touring. He was saying that he's not enjoying it as much. And I relate to that because the older you get, it gets a lot harder. It's pretty grueling as time goes on. And we were
Sure.
talking about David Bowie as well and all sorts of things. But when we started to rehearse this, and it was so much fun because the bass part is very, very cool. And like I said, it's pretty much a voice and bass feature. But the one thing I noticed that he kept changing he kept displacing the bars, if that's the right word. It's like, he kept kind of either making a 2 bar phrase into a 3 bar phrase, or making a bar phrase into a
Oh.
1 bar phrase, and he kept like sort of shifting the bars and that stuff. And I'm thinking, wow, this isn't
Right.
what was happening on, because I just learned what was on the record and I'd
Yeah, yeah.
transcribed it, and I'd learned it. So it was okay. But I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is changing every time. Um, and literally every time we did it, every rehearsal. And I'm thinking, boy, oh boy, I need to really be on this. So I had to keep switching. I had to keep switching bars to keep.
Did it ever kind of come out the same way? Did he ever find this rhythm where he liked how the phrase should be stated and just kind of kept it there, or was it always
Oh, it
moving?
was.
And even like on the taping, was the taping a version that had not
Yeah,
been
yeah, it was
rehearsed?
different on the taping as well. So yeah,
Crazy.
so the two, there's like a main theme of the bass thing, but when he goes into that's the verse. But when he goes into the chorus, it's like sort of bum 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 bum. But he would sort of go bum 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 bum. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
he,
yeah.
he would just, I think displacement is the right word. He'd move these bars around, so I'd have to like double the first bar, as opposed to going on to bar two. I'd have to play bar one twice.
Sure.
you know and
Right.
and we had one of our trumpet players was playing on it, and I felt sorry for him, man, because you can't really hide with a trumpet, man. If you're doing a set riff, and it
Right.
changes every time. You can't hide from that, where at least with the bass you can kind of get away with it a bit more. But anyway, it was a challenge. Um, so it wasn't a
Man.
technical thing; it was just more a rhythmic. And you just had to keep your ears open. I'm thinking, well, if I can't
Yeah.
do this after 40 years, I shouldn't be here. So it went great. I
Right,
went with
right.
him. Everything he did, I adapted. I was listening round the corner. And it was great, and he loved it. And you watched the clip, and he shook my hand afterwards, and because and that was very special for me, because I remember as a kid, one of my brothers had an album, and I think it was called "There Goes Rhyming Simon." I think it's called
Okay.
that, and it's got like some great, it's like his solo album. It's got some great tracks on there, and I used to sing along with that as a kid. I absolutely loved it. Every track on that album is a winner. So yeah, to get to play with this guy, and to have and to play that, something like that song, which is a big bass feature, and of course, so many
Yeah.
people contacted me and said, "Oh my God, we saw that. That must have been an incredible experience. Well done. What a roast that must have been. You must have been terrified of it." Because again,
Yeah.
I've never had that opportunity to play something so flamboyant with Jools on his show before. It was a real standout moment for me, you know. So yeah, it's interesting that that's one of the more recent things. That was really an incredible experience for me. What a
Man, it's so great that you've had the opportunity to kind of connect your musical upbringing and your life upbringing and what music was to you in these formative years
sure.
to this professional experience with the same people, with Paul Simon and Sting referencing Mingus and Al Jarreau. That's really
Oh,
cool,
yeah.
man. Like that's
And same with yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, with Shaka, the first time we played with her was the mid '90s, and it was when Jules only wanted me to play double bass, and I knew she was coming on the show. And prior to that point, everything was doable on upright. And when I heard she wanted to do "Ain't Nobody, I'm Every Woman," I said to Jules, "Listen, you've got to let me play bass guitar. I'm not doing, I'm not playing." I'm not playing
yeah,
those tunes on this. And he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "No, Jules, come on, man." You know, and it took some convincing. But when that happened in the mid '90s, like '94, '95, that was the turning point where he was okay with me using both. But the first four
okay.
years, it was just upright, you know. But with Shaka, I thought, "There's no way I'm going to break my fingers trying to play."
Yeah, well, and that's not that music. That's not that sound. That's not how the
Yeah,
notes respond to the overall nature of that
yeah,
feel.
exactly that. You know, so she was special as well. Again, it's been great playing with the people who I grew up buying records. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And George Benson was great too. We played on Broadway with him. That's on YouTube. So yeah, because these are the guys that I bought their records. You know, and to get to play with them. And I think my older brothers must have been annoyed with me because they're the ones that were at home playing all of these records with Paul Simon and sort of you know, Jack Bruce and all of these sort of guys and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and I've got to play with most of these, and I thought my brothers must hate me. They're the ones that bought the records, and I was probably in their
Right.
rooms ruining them when they weren't listening, you know.
Uh,
But
Yeah, and now you're playing
yeah,
with
you
them.
know, but it's funny. It's been a very nostalgic time for me because, you know, recently somebody contacted, you know, me speaking with my trombone teacher, who was again, if it wasn't for him. And here's the quick thing I must sort of say, right? So when I was at school, I didn't take it up until I was 14 because I was kind of struggling with trying to find. I was good at sports. I love basketball. I still do, but I was trying to find something other than sports to excel at. So to cut a long story short, I went along to him when I was 14. I wanted to play the trombone. He said to me, "You're too old." And I said, "Really? You know, 14." But what he meant is, and I didn't discover this until last month. What he meant
Oh
by
wow.
this, all these years, I just thought he was being flippant. Okay. But what he meant is
Right.
that the school discouraged peripatetic visiting teachers to take on pupils at that late stage. If they're going to be 16,
Oh.
they can't warrant, you know, hiring the person to teach a kid because, you know, they think if you take something up as late as 14, there's not enough time left before you leave school at 16 to really um, play the instrument well. You know, you need, and all of his
Sure.
pupils had been playing since they were 11 and 12. And I said to him, I said, so he said, I said, so it wasn't your decision. I said, when you said you're too old, I said, well, wasn't you being horrible? He said, no, that was the school board's decision. You know, and he sort of said,
Mm.
but I saw something in you. He said, and that's why he loaned me a school trombone. He said, go away. This is how you blow this thing. Come away in 2 weeks and let me assess what you can do. And those 2 weeks, I went nuts. You know, I love the instrument so much. I couldn't put it down. I didn't stop playing it. And I came back 2 weeks later and he went, wow. He said, that's
Yeah.
it. He said, you're my pupil, you know. But I only discovered this last month that he fought my corner. You know, he was the one that went against school regulations and said, no, this guy has got what it takes. And he
Yeah.
sort of said, he said, you were my star pupil. He said, then and forever afterwards, you know, he said, and I said, well, you know, you were such a great teacher. But to only just discover that if it wasn't for him putting his neck on the line, if he'd have just gone with the school, you know, their rules, he would have gone, I'm sorry, you're too old, go away. What on
Yeah.
earth could have happened to me, you know?
Yeah. That was the guy. That was the guy. Like that. It all goes kind of back to
Yeah.
that that conversation, like him going to
Yeah,
bat for you, like
it
that's
changed everything. It was the biggest point in my life,
yeah.
and also there's some guy that's writing a book about the area I grew up in, particularly the church, and I was in a church choir from the ages of 10 to 19. So I was singing in a choir before I was playing an instrument. I was singing bass lines before I was playing them.
Okay.
Uh, and the only reason why I ended up in the church choir was the vicar caught me and my friend throwing some bricks at the church. Um, and it wasn't any kind of stance against organized religion. It was a couple of kids
No.
bored out their minds one sunny afternoon.
Right. Yeah, just
Yeah,
wanting to break
exactly.
things. That's it. Like kids don't realize the consequences of their actions. You just want to hear the
Yeah.
crash. You just want the stimulus of the throw and something
Exactly. And all the
breaking.
windows were covered in grills, so we couldn't have done them, but we were throwing bricks anyway. Anyway, the vicar comes
Sure.
in and says, "Look, you two, do you not think about doing something else more positive, that you're not so bored?" He said, "What about joining the choir?" Uh, and I did, and I stayed there for 9 years. And it was, and this guy wants me to sort of do a little article about my time and basically how it affected my musicality because when I
Sure.
joined that choir, I couldn't read music. I didn't know anything about harmony. And because I stayed there for so long, I sang all the different parts and I learned about, it was ear training, harmony, performance. I did a post
Sure.
on Facebook, on Instagram today on this thing. I posted an old photograph of me in the choir. But so that was amazing training as well. And that was before I even picked up an instrument, so
Yeah. That's cool, man.
there's been some key things in there. So the fact is, none of this was planned. There's so many people out there that are desperate to do what I do and have the career I've had, and they want some advice. And I said it's difficult to say when you want it so bad, but with me, I just love music, and I just you know
Man, I really think that there's something to that in just the what you would know what I'm talking about if I could reference
mm,
the the thing where you put out the energy and it comes the law of
yeah,
returns.
or
Is
the
that what
law
I'm?
of attraction. I think some
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Law of
yeah,
attraction is like when you take the pressure
yeah.
off of it. You take this it's got to happen this way. It's got to happen this way, and you just relax into it and just specifically make it something that's
Oh yeah,
joyful.
and the other thing is,
I think you put out that energy within music or within whatever it is you're doing, and and that's what's kind of responded to when you take when you take your finances out of gigging,
yeah.
and like everything kind of opens up once we take the pressure
Yeah,
off of it. That's what I
100%.
think.
And it's funny the priorities as well, because for me, it's always been about the craft. It always has been. It
Right.
always will be. There's nothing more important for me. Nothing gives me as much pleasure in the world of music than practicing, learning, studying. Improving. I still have that, and for me, it's always the most important thing. But you get sort of a lot of players come to me now, and they say their first question is, "How do you get an endorsement deal? How do I get free gear? How do I get on the front cover of a magazine?" I'm thinking, these are
You
yeah,
practice.
this is
You
your
practice.
opening
That's
gambit.
what you do.
I never dreamt that I would be in a high-profile band or being on magazine covers or getting endorsements, and I didn't, and I wasn't interested. It didn't enter my mind. What it was,
Sure.
I just loved music. I loved playing an instrument. I loved making music, and I certainly was thrilled that I was able to make a living because my parents both were factory workers. Although my brothers played guitar, they were never professional. So I was so lucky
Sure.
to have grown up where I did, which was quite an industrial area, and I ended up doing something that I absolutely loved and adored, and I'm still doing it. I'm still doing it. But I
Yeah.
love that saying. I don't know who it's attributed to, but it's really quite fundamental, and it's the harder you work, the luckier you get.
I've never heard that one, but I
Yeah.
completely agree. I
And,
completely
but
agree.
the main thing
Yeah.
is that you have to do the work. You have to put the time and you have to be diligent, determined, tenacious, patient.
Sure.
And the thing is, and you could be all those things, and stuff might not happen. You might not. be hugely successful. But my God, surely it's worth it. Surely, you're going to feel better about yourself and having achieved. You strove for something. Strove, is that the right word?
I know, I do agree, and I also agree with the idea that um, success and the idea of success is very personal. So just being Jaco Pastorius isn't the only way to
Sure,
success.
sure.
As a musician or as a bass player, like, for me, I love this. I love being able to talk with musicians about music. Like, this to me
Sure.
is huge. I love being able to transcribe and really get into records, and the things I'm doing right now with this online situation. Like, that's really just really what fulfills me. And so, like, that's successful
Sure.
to me. And I think within success, it's just there's a lot of latitude in there. And there's room for everybody. It's not just success means you're on the cover of the Bass magazine.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, with the social media thing, because I mean, I'm out there. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and I still have mixed feelings about it because, sometimes I just find it just a bit kind of stressy, and some people thrive on it, and some people, it's their main part of their day is posting something, and I never do those things where I post videos of me shredding and that, because I don't have the time, I don't have the inclination. That's not who and what I am. If other people want to do it, that's great. But I have noticed the people that do that, they get so much attention and so many, like, hundreds of thousands of likes. And I can put a photograph of me playing with Jeff Beck or and you might get a few hundred likes, and you just think, well, it's fine, because that's who I am and that's what I do. But it is interesting that the guy shredding or doing a big slap solo will get fine.
Yeah, I think that, and that's what kind of gets me dark about the whole thing, is because there's no the guy shredding is okay, cool. He put some work into that, That's fine. I mean, on all aspects, to edit the video, if he did, to set up his room to look clean, whatever. But it's just like that's not a career, and that's not making music with people. And it's hard to subscribe to the fact that that's releasing art into the world.
Sure. Well, you know what I liken it to? It's a bit like those old Victorian carnivals where you pay to get in, and you're seeing all of these sort of talented trapeze artists, whatever, doing these things, and then what the people really want to see, they want to see the bearded lady.
I was hoping that's where you were going to go with that. Yeah, the freak show. I was hoping that's where you were going to go.
The two-headed goat or whatever. They want to see the kind of. Sure. They want to see the freaky stuff. And it's kind of, and it feels like that with social media. I mean, if I put videos out of the stuff that I played with these iconic people, it wouldn't be impressive, because what I've had to play with them has been quite sort of basic and fundamental. But it's what I've had to play. It's what they have wanted. It's what they've requested. But it just doesn't translate well into the world of social media. Whereas if
right, just everything's very sensationalized.
Yeah, and it's. But as you said, I guess it gives everyone a platform, and it gives everyone a fair shot at things. But I think it does create a very false thing, really, which I'm not sure is a terribly good thing. But all I know is that I still get the most satisfaction for me, like I said, playing my instrument and playing it well. Backing someone and them coming up to me saying, "Wow, you did a great job," and just still learning. I still study. I mean, I've got books all around me on all manner of things, and I study all the time. I always want to learn and improve and evolve. I mean, that's never going to change. Pretty important.
That's great. Man, I'm gonna need to have you back on the show. I'm sure we have many more hours of stories you can share with everybody. This is fantastic.
Well, thank you. As long as I haven't bored you too much with this one, then that's very.
No, not at all. Man, thanks so much. Definitely have a happy New Year, and maybe come back after the New Year's Eve and tell us about what happened at the Hootenanny. I'd love to hear about how that shaped up.
It's a shame, actually, because there are some names on the table, but unfortunately I'm not able to disclose them because I'll get in a load of trouble.
Yeah. Let's talk
Yeah,
about it
yeah,
after the fact. I think then we can talk about, and then we can talk about who might
yeah.
have been
Yeah,
on the
because
table.
if they can't get these guys, as you said, yeah, it will still make a great conversation of who should have been, who was planned on there. So yeah, all right. Listen, it was thanks so much for inviting me. I hope I didn't sort of bore you too much or
Oh no, this was fantastic. This was a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun.
All right, cheers, man. Thanks, man.
If you have enjoyed this episode and you're interested to know what else is happening with the Bass Shed, you can find me on Facebook /The Bass Shed, Instagram @The Bass Shed, Twitter @Bass Shed. All right, that was my talk with Dave Swift. Man, what some interesting stories there. I think are great. Again, the story about how he connected with the LaFaro family and contributed to the Scott LaFaro book will be up at thebassshed.com /podcast/ Dave Swift. Hope you all check that out. It's a really interesting story, and I was thinking about myself going through that process and when he was talking about the LaFaro story, and it's wow. That's some heavy connection to bass history and jazz history, and I hope you all get a chance to listen to that. That's what I got, folks. That was Dave Swift. I will catch you on the next one in a minute.